Okay, we're going to go ahead and get started. Hello, everyone. My name is Harrison, and I am a senior marine biologist here at Island Dolphin Care. And today we are going to be talking about marine invertebrates and how to identify them when out snorkeling or scuba diving or any other water activities. Before we proceed, I want to make sure that you can see my screen. So I'm trying to figure out how I can see the chat box and also my screen at the same time. So bear with me 1 second. I'm not sure. Can everyone see the PowerPoint? Please type in the chat box that you can. There's the chat box. Okay, great. Now I just got an email that someone that wants to join. Let me shoot them over the link and then we can start. Okay, so let's go ahead and get started. So a little bit about me. I already told you that I'm a senior marine biologist here at Island Dolphin Care, but I am also a professor of biological and physical sciences at Broward College, and I'm also a triple graduate of the University of Miami. I love the ocean and I love to study oceanography. Those two things are my passion, and I'm very excited today to go ahead and talk about marine invertebrates, which I find very fascinating myself, and share them with you guys. So a little bit about what Island Dolphin Care is. Island Dolphin Care is a 501c3 not-for-profit organization located in Key Largo, Florida. And our mission is two-part. First, our mission is dedicated to providing dolphin-assisted therapy programs to children with special needs and adults with special needs, their families, and also to provide therapeutic programs to wounded war veterans that serve our country. We also provide marine science education, research, and outreach to various K-12 schools, universities, and other educational organizations. And before I continue with our presentation, I just want to let you guys know that we are recording this so that we will be able to post it on our YouTube channel for you guys to reference back later. So if you miss something, don't worry, it'll be posted to our YouTube channel, and I'll talk more about that at the end of the PowerPoint. So our animals. So here at Island Dolphin Care, we are home to 8 Atlantic bottlenose dolphins, and we also have various other marine habitats and educational exhibits, which are home to tropical marine fish, sharks, eels, and of course, invertebrates, which is what we're going to be talking about today. So today, we are going to be talking about marine invertebrates and how to identify them. This lecture is primarily based off of Reef's Creature Identification book, which you see the cover here, which I highly recommend getting if you don't have a copy already. It is very informative, full of pictures, and it's really helpful when trying to ID animals out when you're scuba diving or snorkeling. So definitely get a copy of this book if you don't have one. So the goal for today is to give you guys a brief introduction and overview of 5 different marine invertebrate phyla. This is not our in-depth marine invertebrate lecture. Later on, I will be doing a full marine invertebrate characteristic lecture about animals in depth. This is more just an overview of how to identify them and also what phylum or phyla they belong to. Now, most of the participants today are either in middle school or high school. There are some also older adults and also some younger students. So I'm going to try and generalize the information to a broad range of ages for everyone to learn. So we're going to go ahead and start with what an invertebrate is. So as you can see on the screen, An invertebrate is any animal without a backbone or spinal cord. The vast majority of animals on Earth are actually invertebrates. It's an estimated that 90 to 95% of the known species of animals on Earth are invertebrates, although the most common animals that we think of are actually vertebrates. So dogs, cats, horses, dolphins, and humans are all vertebrates. And we're actually going to be talking about the animals that are not those animals. So hold on, 2 more people want to join. So welcome. Okay, great. So now that we have more of our friends joining us, let's go ahead and continue. So we basically just covered what an invertebrate is. Now we're going to cover what a phylum is. So a phylum is a broad categorization used by scientists to classify animals. So all animals on planet Earth are categorized into different phyla, and each animal or each phylum has specific characteristics that all the animals in that phylum share. And that's what I was saying earlier, that we're going to have a full characteristic lecture for the different marine phyla later on. This workshop is just an overview of how to identify animals. So I'm going to briefly talk about the characteristics today that each phyla is characteristic of, but we're going to talk more in depth about it in a future lecture. So over here on the right side of the screen, you will see the different orders that are used to classify animals. And we start very broad with the domain and kingdom and go very narrow and specific down to the species level. So today we're just going to be staying right here in more of the broad sense where the phylums are, or the phyla are, and we're going to talk about 5 different ones today. The 5 that we're going to talk about are echinoderms, mollusks, arthropods, nidarians, and poriferans, or the phyla Echinodermata, Mollusca, Arthropoda, Nidaria, and Porifera. So let's go ahead and start with the first phyla. So the first phyla that we're going to talk about today are the echinoderms. Now, as you can see, echinoderms come in all shapes and sizes and colors, and they're actually probably very familiar to you guys. You just didn't know that they were called echinoderms. So the first echinoderm that we're going to talk about is everyone's favorite, well, at least one of my favorites, the sea star. Now, I want you guys to note that I called it a sea star and not a starfish. And that is because these animals are invertebrates, so they're not fish. Fish are actually vertebrates and have backbones, whereas invertebrates do not have backbones. So if we incorrectly call this animal a starfish, we're not being scientifically accurate with our information. So if you only learn one thing from this workshop, it is my goal to teach you that these animals are called sea stars and not starfish. Okay, so from now on, please refer to this animal as a sea star. So as you can see here, this is Asterias rubens. So the way this PowerPoint is structured is we have a picture of the animal, then we have its common name, and then we have its scientific name underneath. Now, scientific names are commonly only used by scientists and researchers that are trying to talk about specific species in research. But if we're just talking about animals in everyday conversations, we usually use the common names. So we're not going to talk too much about the scientific names today. We'll save that for our future lecture. Today we'll just talk about the common names more or less. So the common name of this animal right here is the red sea star. And you guys are pretty familiar with Patrick, the sea star from SpongeBob. Well, like I said, he is a sea star and not a starfish. So please make sure you know that. Over here on the right side of the screen, you will see a spiny brittle star. So you may think that they are kind of looking alike, despite the colors. They kind of have the same anatomical body plan. They have a central disc with arms radiating out from the center, just like the sea star does. Well, they're actually very close cousins. So they're very closely genetically related, and these animals have 5 arms just like sea stars do, and they have rough, bumpy, or spiky skin just like sea stars do. So these are the spiny brittle stars. Okay. So on the first slide, we have the common sea star and the spiny brittle star. So I forgot to mention up here about the group that we're talking about, echinoderms, the phylum that we're talking about. So all of these animals have either rough, bumpy, or spiky skin. So that's kind of one of the main characteristics. There's a lot others that are characteristic of this phylum, but the main characteristic is that all animals in this phylum have rough, bumpy, or spiky skin. So the common sea star and the spiny brittle star are representative of that, as you can see. Moving right along, we're going to start on the right side of the screen this time, and we have the serpent brittle star. So very close looking to the spiny brittle star, except there's no spines or spikes on the arms, right? It's smooth, which is why we say it looks like a snake or a serpent. So this is called the serpent brittle star, okay? The arms on the brittle stars are much skinnier than the arms on the sea stars, especially the Bahama sea stars that we see here in the Florida Keys and in the Bahamas. So this is our serpent brittle star. As you can see, it also has some bumpy skin characteristics to it. And then over here on the left side of the screen, we actually have the common sea cucumber. So sea cucumbers are very common here in the Florida Keys and throughout the Caribbean, and they actually have bumps all over their skin. So you're probably thinking, well, how are sea cucumbers related to sea stars? Because they don't look anything like them. They have a totally different body plan. Well, I'll explain that in a second because I want to introduce you to our next set of echinoderms, which are the urchins. So over here on the left, we have our pencil urchin. And then on the right, we have our purple pincushion urchin. So what I want you guys to picture is take your hand flat out in front of you with the palm facing up, okay? Imagine, we're going to use our imagination here, that this is a sea star, okay? We have 5 fingers, so we have 5 arms on our sea star, and that the palm of our hand is our central disc, okay? So now imagine that you're going to, over evolutionary time, adapt to your environment and become an urchin. And the way you do that from 5 arms is that all 5 of your fingers ball up at the top. So go ahead and try that. So your hand should be flat out in front of you with all 5 fingers spread out, and then you're gonna curl up all those 5 fingers to touch at the top, okay? Your hand should look something like a ball right now, and that's actually sort of how the sea star evolved over time into an urchin, okay? Of course, there's been a lot of different ancestors in between these species, but in general, that's kind of how the evolution practice happened for echinoderms. So they became this flat 5-pointed star and then became a ball, a 5-pointed ball in the shape of an urchin. Then from there, they became elongated over time, kind of like if you take a pizza dough roller and roll it over some dough of pizza, and you actually get this 5-pointed tube, which is the sea cucumber. So that's kind of really cool how the echinoderms have evolved over time, and now you know how to identify them. These are obviously not all the echinoderms. These are just the most common ones that we see here on the reefs, where you would see them out snorkeling or scuba diving. So I want to make sure that we highlight the most common ones. Okay, so we have the sea star, the spiny brittle star, the common sea cucumber, the serpent brittle star, the pencil urchin, and the pincushion urchin, okay? On the next slide, we have 2 more urchins. We have the white pincushion urchin and the rock sea urchin, okay? So, are there any questions about our echinoderms before we move on? And we can also save the questions for the end too and answer them at the end as well. All right, so those were our echinoderms. Now we're going to talk about mollusks. Okay, so mollusks are animals that have soft bodies and hard shells. And again, there's other characteristics that are specific to this phylum. However, the most important one that I want you guys to know for the sake of this PowerPoint is soft body, hard shell. Okay, so all these animals have a soft body and hard shell. And the first animal that I'm going to introduce to you that's a mollusk is a milk conch. So as you can see, this animal is kind of like a snail. It has a soft body and a hard shell, which snails are actually the terrestrial or land cousins of conchs. If anyone's ever had conch fritters or conch salad at a restaurant, this is actually the animal that you're eating. And it's very good to eat. However, they are threatened. Some species of conchs are endangered, and they're also protected. So later on, when we talk about marine conservation and sustainable fishing practices in another PowerPoint, we will talk about the specifics about how to be a responsible ocean ambassador and consume seafood sustainably. But just so you guys know, for your imagery, this is what a conch looks like, okay? So it has a soft body and a hard shell, and then it has this feeding appendage called a radula, and it also has a muscular foot, okay? So this is our male conch. Over here, this is a horse conch. Okay, so they look very different so that you are able to tell them apart. Next, we have our turbo snail. So we actually are only seeing the shell of the animal right now. The soft body is inside of the shell, and they're called turbo snails, but they're actually not very fast. So the name kind of doesn't match the animal. But this is called a turbo snail, and then this is a flame scallop. Okay, so you can see it has a hard shell and then a soft body on the inside. Okay, so any questions about our 4 mollusks that we just were introduced to? No? Okay, great. So the next phylum we're going to talk about are arthropods. So we are on 3 of 5. So arthropods are animals that have a hard exoskeleton on the outside of their body. So they don't have a shell. Instead, they actually wear their skeleton on the outside. Now, we're endoskeleton animals. So we wear our skeleton on the inside, and our skin is our protection. However, these animals wear their skeletons on the outside, and their skeleton provides them protection. So as you can see, these are the lobsters, the shrimps, and the crabs. Now, if we break this word down, the root of the word pod means foot, and the prefix arthro means joint. So if you think of like arthritis, where you get arthritis is in your joints, and then pod is foot. So arthro means joint and pod means foot. So if we put it together, these are all jointed footed animals. So as you can see, they have many different jointed feet on their bodies, and they have this hard exoskeleton, okay? Now, the first arthropod that I want to introduce you to is the decorator crab, okay? So here's our decorator crab. He actually takes different shells and pebbles and rocks and things like that from the environment and puts them on top of his body to kind of help camouflage himself for protection as well. So that's why he's called a decorator crab. This is actually called an arrowhead crab here in the middle. It's not a spider. Some people confuse this animal and call it a sea spider, but it's not a spider. It's actually just it's a crab. It's not a spider. So it's called an arrowhead crab because if you're able to look at the animal up close, there is an arrow right on the top of its head. So, oh, I see that we have some, there we go. Okay, so this is our arrowhead crab. And then over here on the left, we have our Sally Lightfoot crab. Okay, so these are the first 3 arthropods that I want to introduce you to: the decorator crab, the arrowhead crab, and the Sally Lightfoot. Next, we have our hermit crab, and then our banded coral shrimp. Now, I'm going to talk about the hermit crab last. I want to talk about the banded coral shrimp first. So the banded coral shrimp is obviously very distinct. It has these bands, these red alternating red and white bands on its body, and they're very easy to spot in sandy areas, on the reefs, and these are the banded coral shrimp. Now over here on the left side, we have our hermit crab. Now, you guys are probably very familiar with hermit crabs, and you're probably thinking to yourself, well, it has a shell, but you told us earlier that only mollusks had shells, right? So a mollusk was an animal with a soft body and a hard shell. Now, I forgot to mention that mollusks make their shells. So we're actually going to talk more about this in depth in the future invertebrate lecture on how they make their shells. But what you need to know for this lecture is that all mollusks make their shells. So arthropods, we said, have their exoskeleton for protection. But the hermit crab has learned over time that if they find empty shells or animals living in shells and they take those shells from them, they can use those shells for extra protection. So the hermit crab actually doesn't make its shell. It can change from shell to shell. So it just uses its shell as an additional layer of protection, whereas the mollusks make their shells and they only have one shell for their whole life. Okay, so we'll talk more about that in the next lecture. But it's interesting to note that hermit crabs do have shells for protection, and they have learned over time to use them and find them as additional sources for that. All right, so these are the hermit crabs and the banded coral shrimps, Sally lightfoots, the arrowhead crabs, and the decorator crabs. Right? All right, now we have the next set of arthropods, the horseshoe crab, which some of you may recognize, the emerald crab, and the slipper lobster. Okay, so slipper lobsters are really cool. They're actually not the lobsters that you would eat. Those are either spiny lobsters or Maine lobsters. These are a different type of lobster that we see here on the reefs. They're called slipper lobsters. And then over here we have horseshoe crabs, which are very important for human medicine. Their blood is used for a lot of different medicinal applications and purposes. So we'll talk more about the application of horseshoe blood later on in the next lecture as well. Okay, but for this lecture, we're IDing our animals. So let's make sure we have our arthropod ID down. These are decorator crabs. Then these are arrowhead crabs, Sally lightfoot crabs, hermit crabs, banded coral shrimp, slipper lobsters, emerald crabs, and horseshoe crabs. All right, so the fourth out of our 5 phyla that we're going to talk about today is the nidarians. So a nidarian is any animal with stinging nematocysts or stinging cells. And those include the anemones, the corals, and the jellies. So just like I mentioned in the very beginning, let's go back to the sea stars. These animals are sea stars because they're not fish, so that's why we don't say that they're starfish. Well, for the same purposes that jellyfish are not fish either. They are, whoops, we're almost out of time, guys. That jellyfish are not fish either, so we don't actually call them jellyfish. We call them sea jellies or jellies. So these are jellies, and we'll talk about them in a second. But in this phylum, we have the anemones, the corals, and the jellies. So the 2 most common anemones that you might see out on the reefs is this pink-tipped anemone and also this rock anemone. Okay, so these are the 2 anemones that I want you to know, the pink tip and the rock. Oh, I see that my slides for the jellies and the corals are not here. So I'll just talk about them and I'll point them out. So this is a brain coral right here. A lot of you may or may not know that corals are actually animals. They are not plants. What confuses people about corals is the fact that they have this algae that lives inside of their cells that's able to photosynthesize and make food for the coral. So people confuse the corals as plants because of that photosynthesis ability of the algae that lives inside of their cells, but they're actually true animals, not plants. And they're not rocks either. What they actually do is they secrete rock over the millions of years that they're alive. And we will talk about how they actually do that, the calcium carbonate secretion process, later in the next lecture as well. So I hope everyone's able to tune in for that lecture because there's a lot of cool information that we're going to talk about. And the date of that is not announced yet. I'll talk more about that at the end. But for now, I want you to know that corals are animals and that this is a brain coral and that we already talked about this being a jelly and not a jellyfish. Okay, so we either call this animal a sea jelly or a jelly, not a jellyfish. All right, so those are the nidarians. Now, last but not least, we have the poriferans. So poriferans are animals just like corals are, and they actually are exclusively made up of sponges. Okay, so sponges are the poriferans, and sponges are animals. So SpongeBob SquarePants is actually an animal, believe it or not. He is an animal just like you and I are, just like dolphins are, just like dogs are, just like fish are. So sponges, although they're very, very simple, they are true animals. And they're made up of these pores on their body that allow water to pass through them. And that's how they get their nutrients. So the sponges that I want you to know is the common ball sponge, the rope or tree sponge, and then we have big barrel sponges out on the reefs, tube sponges, or encrusting sponges. So barrel and tube sponges kind of grow up off of the substrate or bottom of the reef, and they're very distinct. You can see that it's a sponge. Encrusting sponges actually grow over the top of the reef, kind of like flat growing, so you won't see them coming off the reef like you will tubes and barrel sponges. And then these ball and rope or tree sponges are also off the reef, but they're not popping up like these barrel or tube sponges are. So these are our 5 sponges: common ball, common rope or tree, barrel, yellow tube, and encrusting. Okay. So that pretty much sums up our invertebrate ID lecture. Remember, there's going to be another lecture posted or given in the next few weeks. I have to talk to my science team and figure out when the best date and time is for everyone to join. But once I know when it is, we will be posting that date and time on our social media pages. So if you enjoyed this presentation and you want to tune in for more, please follow us at IDC Key Largo on Facebook and Instagram, and also tell your friends about these lectures as well, because we're going to be doing our in-depth invertebrate ID. We're going to be doing a fish ID lecture. We're going to be doing a marine conservation and sustainable fishing lecture. So we have a whole bunch of different lecture topics scheduled and lined up for you guys. So we want to make sure you know about them. So please follow our social media pages and make sure you like us and follow us on Facebook and Instagram. Also, please subscribe to our YouTube channel. Not only do we have cool science labs that you can do at home with your family, but we also have other fun activities for you to do. And also you can watch these lectures online again. So please subscribe to our YouTube channel. Just go ahead and hit the subscribe button when you click on our YouTube channel, and that way you can follow us there as well. And then last but not least, if you can and are able to, you can make a donation on our website at islanddolphincare.org, which helps us operate during these tough times during COVID-19. So we have 4 minutes and 21 seconds before Zoom kicks us off. So if anyone has any questions, feel free to go ahead and ask them now, or you guys can email me. I'll go ahead and put my email in the chat for everyone so that you can email me questions as well. But I want to thank you guys for joining me today and for learning all about marine invertebrates. Trying to navigate Zoom here. Does anyone have any questions? trying to... No? Everyone's all set? Awesome. Yeah, Sally Lightfoot crabs are really cool. They're one of my favorite animals to find on the reefs as well. Haha, yes, the decorator crab is a real thing. It's not made up. Awesome. I look forward to touching base with you. All right, guys, Zoom is go ahead and is going to kick me off now. So I want to thank everyone for joining us one more time. Please, again, like us on Facebook and Instagram, subscribe to our YouTube channel, and we hope to see you at the next one.